Welcome, everyone, to episode 12 of the most interesting people in logistics. Today's guest is Kurtis Tryber, the founder and CEO of Exo Freight. Thanks, Kurtis, for taking your time today to be on the show.
Yeah, thanks, Paul, for bringing me on. Happy to be here.
Definitely. Kurtis, so I've heard a lot of interesting stuff about Exo Freight. And I first of all, I just want to start off by asking you, how did you get into logistics? You're a young guy, you're 31. And you're right now in charge of a company that's been venture backed and you have very large ambitions. So how did the beginning look like? What did you do after, what did you do in college? What did you graduate in? And what did you do afterwards?
Okay. Yeah. So surprisingly enough, I actually did not go to college. So I did not graduate college. Right out of high school, I was an air traffic controller for the U.S. Air Force. So from 18 to about 2015, if you will, that was my main focus. About 3 years through my Air Force career, I actually started my first freight brokerage, my brother and I, just as a spare side hustle business. From there, we grew that company to a small shop. It was about a $10 million shop, and eventually moved it to Las Vegas. And so that was my first, dabble in logistics. I never did work for a large firm. I wasn't, some of the big three, really just learned logistics a lot on my own. And then in 2018, I made a transition into the technology side of freight, where my brother and I, we moved to San Francisco to help found a company called Parade, which was building technology to sort of add on to an incumbent brokerage's existing platforms. Maybe they were using a McLeod or a TMW TMS, something that they've had for a while. And we were building a platform to sort of, enable those, analog brokerages, if you will, to have more machine learning and carrier matching and just add to their existing technology stack. So we did that for 2.5 years, my brother and I. And then after the, about right when the pandemic was starting in 2020, we saw some pretty big gaps in the industry, just from exploring and, as we were at Parade, working with a lot of our customers there. We just saw areas where, if another brokerage was to be started, there would be some very big gaps that it could fill. And that's when we took it upon ourselves in May of 2020 to start Exofreight.
Okay. That was definitely kind of a tough time to be thinking of starting a business. May 2020, pandemic just started. So what made you decide that was the time to do it?
I think that if you ask anybody in business, best time to start a business is during, some sort of recession or something negative, right? A lot of people will say that. I've done that. This is the second time I've done that. So the first time I did it was very close after the initial big recession in America, the 2008 financial crisis. And so the second time I did it was during a pandemic. And, I think initially right at the pandemic, you're right. It was a very scary time because a lot of shippers were shutting down, just straight up factories just, couldn't be open for XYZ reasons, people actually being sick or different laws coming down from different states that they were in. But I think for us, it actually gave us a really great opportunity to start when the economy and people were starting to go back to work. So we were sort of a player in a very calm state to when things started to turn back on, it started to turn on with a vengeance. And so it was sort of we got to ride sort of as things started to come back online, we sort of got to ride along with that. Right.
Definitely.
So I think it's a blessing for sure.
Awesome. So how did that, the rest of 2020 look like for Exo Freight?
Exo Freight in 2020 was sort of this weird incubation period for our company, right? Surprisingly enough, we weren't even actually called Exo Freight in 2020. We were operating under an existing name from the brokerage that Kris and I had started back in 2012. And basically from May, I'd say all the way till about December, we sort of we were doing a couple of things internally and sort of keeping the company really close to the chest. And, one of the things we were doing was building our internal technology from the ground up, right? So we have to build a TMS. We have to make the TMS, awesome. It has to have core features, sort of just the groundwork, the foundation. And during that time, we had brought on some pretty good, some pretty large enterprise customers that were just interested in the way we were thinking about the world. And they sort of, allowed us to play in their freight networks to really just, again, build our technology and make sure it could actually operate at an enterprise level. So that was pretty much all of 2020, and those couple of customers really allowed us to not only move a lot of freight, scale the company, build our technology, and then set us up for a venture capital raise and a name change like early that following year in 2021.
Okay. And then, so you started building technology in May 2020, right? Or were you building it prior? Okay. And to build an amazing TMS, I mean, that must take a lot of work, a lot of time, a lot of capital, and, people that are skilled. So how did that look like? And are you complete? Like, are you done with building a TMS, or are you still developing it?
I think done is very ambitious. Like, you may never get there.
Sure, definitely.
But I'd say, like, from that first year, the good news is my brother is a full stack engineer. I mean, he can do front end, he can do back end, he can do infrastructure. He knows everything, and he's fairly good at most of those things. So that's a huge leg up, right? So from a capital perspective, he's probably the cheapest engineer in the world because he's the co-founder and he works for beer and food, right? So we had a low tech budget there to begin with, but having been at a prior company for the 2.5 years, when we were thinking about building the TMS, you look at some of these like really large systems that exist today, and like they're built for lots of different companies that do lots of different things, right? What we were building was a TMS that does exactly what our company needed to do based on the business that we do. And so that made it, you could cut out a lot of features, right? And really get down to like core competency, like this is the things that this needs to do. And then you iterate on that, right? So for our first year, it was really about, because Exofreight is, and we'll go into the name in a minute, but I would consider us a digital freight brokerage, but there's a little bit different spin on the way we think about it. But like that first year, it was all about, could we take an order or a load from a customer digitally, right? So whether that was early on, it was just a lot of EDI, right? So could we take an EDI order and have it run through our TMS with as little human interaction as possible, right? So automating pricing, automating carrier pricing, automating carrier matching, carrier engagement, automating tracking, POD retrieval, so we could go essentially by the end of 2021 from quote all the way to cash, not every load, but like the perfect load could go through there. And there's some sort of automation that would make sure it made it all the way to an invoice to a customer, right? So that was really like the proving ground. So, you talk about what did we build and is it complete? Well, that was the first mission, right? Can we take a load from A to B internally with as little humans as possible? And that was the big accomplishment in 2020, that first year. And now, obviously, moving beyond that, our tech budget has certainly increased, and we've got more engineers. So it's not just Kris building anymore. We've got front end engineers that specialize in just front end and back end and infrastructure, right? So now we're able to build a lot quicker. Okay.
So when you were selling the brokerage services to a customer, were you selling the TMS, the digital TMS? Because like, I mean, that does differentiate you from a regular broker that doesn't have that kind of technology. And I guess like customers are probably intrigued by they want to probably test it out. So is that what brought you customers, you think, or was it just the normal relationship you had with them, like a casual relationship?
I think it was twofold, right? So like, obviously, you think about large enterprise customers and they're not super interested in like the technology you created for the shipper, right? Because they've got technology. So a lot of our early customers, it was really about, hey, we specialize in this niche, this open deck market, right? That's the first key differentiator. And so when we talk to customers, whether they're going to use our technology or have their own, or will integrate one way or the other, it was really about, why are you different than the other 10 brokers that I have in my mix? And that was a core competency. Like, hey, like we really want to focus on this open deck space. It's an area where most people fail, not fail, but it's an area where most people just don't have a lot of resources, and it's not worth it to most big companies. And what we found is customers agree. when you go into a shipper, when we go into a shipper and we tell them our story and why we're here and why we play in these certain niches, they almost always agree. And that's really the biggest piece. Then you move into the technology piece, and that just gets even more interesting for like these open deck shippers, where they go, I love that you're in that space. I love that you're operating there. We've got people in the mix that kind of sort of do it, but they'd rather not. And then you kind of hit them with, hey, this is the technology that we're building, not only for us internally, but for you to have and to manage some of your transportation. And that really fires them up, where they go, oh, this makes a lot of sense. Like, nobody's came to me with a pitch like that. Not to say that there's similar products on the market, but I think what we're building does have some differentiating factor backed with some differentiated execution.
Okay. So you said that you are a digital freight brokerage. So could a carrier log on to exofreight.com, or that's a site, right? Exofreight.com. Could they go on and then just book a load straight off the board if they have a login?
Technically, I guess there's not like an area today where carriers log in. So we haven't released like a carrier facing app or a carrier facing load board, if you will, where carriers log in. That does exist. We just go about it a different way. And there's a lot of reasons of why we've gone the path that we've gone, right? If you look at some digital brokerages today, they sort of have this mentality or this thought process that a carrier is going to want to like go to their system and do things in their system. And the reality is like the density oftentimes like doesn't exist, right? So we're by no means like $100-200 million brokerage. So like, why would a carrier specifically want to come and log into our stuff to do business with us? Because they just don't have as many opportunities. So like DAT or truck stop really makes sense for them versus coming directly to us. Now, With that being said, we sort of take this approach of, if a carrier is going to do business with us, like, we don't really mind how they get to us, right? Meaning like they could come in through, maybe we post it on a load board, right? A truck stop or a DAT. And so the way that we think about it is if a carrier finds us through some means, right? However they, maybe it's a referral from somewhere, maybe it's a shipper that refers them, or however they find us, the opportunity is actually ours to win or ours to lose with a carrier. So the way that we think about building our technology for the carrier today is, if you're going to work with us once, it's our job to figure out how we can work with you in the future. It's not your job as the carrier to come to my site and actively try to work with me. It's my job to offer you the right freight, or to get loads in front of you that matter, to make you want to come back, right? So we just think about carrier retention in a little bit different way, where we're not putting the onus on the carrier to do business with us. It's our TMS that's saying, hey, I think this carrier should haul, or should at least be seeing loads like this, and we automate that.
Okay, definitely. With the venture capital raising, could you tell us about how did you get venture backed? I mean, that's not a lot of freight brokerages are venture backed. So if you could just tell us the story behind that.
Yeah, and I think that in the venture space, you do see a lot of logistics companies trying to get into the venture capital area, and it's definitely a murky space. Venture capitalists, there are a lot of them that know our business, logistics or 3PL brokerage, whatever you want to call it, but there are a lot that don't really fully understand like what we are and why we're here, right? And so I think for us, it was about understanding that if we were to go the venture capital route, this company has to be something that's interesting, and that has to solve a problem. It can't be just a company or a brokerage that moves loads, right? That has a bunch of people and has a bunch of manual processes and things like that, because that's not venture backable. That's just a business, right? And there's money to back those businesses, but it's not venture capital, right?
Everyone does it.
Well, exactly, right? And there's private, we may go down and talk about private equity later in the call here, but like private equity, that's a perfect catalyst for just like brokerages that move loads that are growing and scaling, right? And you see a lot of that in our space. But for us, the way that we thought about this brokerage was, moving loads is like the bare minimum table stakes that we have to do, service and execution. But for us, it was really about, is there a market is there a market that exists where we can create a product and put that product in that market and solve a problem, right? So when I talk about venture capital, when I talk about this company being venture backed, what we're building is a solution for an open deck shipper. So the problem that we solve is open deck shippers today have no internal technology solutions to manage their spend. When I say, shippers don't, I'm talking about your $100 million less company, right? Walmart, they've got a TMS, for example, right? But there's a lot of open deck shippers that are very large companies that are operating off of a spreadsheet, that don't have any means to manage their transportation. And there's no companies really today that are affordable enough to help those companies, right? So there's a lack of budget at most shippers for like TMSs and things like that. And then there's a lack of people trying to even help those companies because, they're not the Anheuser-Busches of the world, right? They're not the $100 million plus freight spend. They're the $20 million freight spend, which is still a good chunk, but you have a lot of these large technology companies or brokerages that just don't find that as a niche. So for us, being able to solve a problem for this very niche part of the industry, and when I mean niche, it's 20% of domestic transportation. So it's still a large number of transportation spend. That's what makes us venture backable. We're actually building technology and solutions to solve problems for paying customers, which are shippers. Also, by the way, we also build really cool internal tools to make our brokerage operate efficiently. But again, you can't get venture backed by making a brokerage operate efficiently. That doesn't help your customer or your carrier. That just helps you internally run a better business. You have to be solving some external problem outside yourself for somebody else that's willing to pay for it.
Okay. And could you tell us how much you got in venture capital?
We raised, I'll say less than 5 million, but more than 1 million in a seed round. And we've got another raise that we'll formally announce coming up in March.
Okay. And what value were you raising at?
We were raising at a 7.5 million cap.
Okay, cool. Mm-hmm. Was this your first time raising venture capital?
Me personally, yeah. So this is the first time that I'd gone through really any fundraising exercises at all. So that was interesting. Learned a lot. But yeah, this is the first time that me and Kris went through it. Exactly.
Did your experience in Silicon Valley help you get connected with people in venture capital, or was this from a different connection?
The answer is yes. So, I think you kind of look at where I've been and where I'm at now. I definitely can attribute some of our early success to spending 2.5 years in Silicon Valley. I think there is a rubric that venture capitalists follow, and it's not necessarily really defined, but there is certain sort of check boxes that I think that are necessary for venture capital. And one of the things that we had going for us is my brother and I were identical twin brothers. I'm a sales operations focused person and can talk to people and make the front of the house, if you will, work really well. While the other side of the house is I've got a co-founder who is, in it for the long haul. We've done businesses and projects together since we were born, and we've been together this whole time. And so that was probably, it was our, Silicon Valley background and that sort of pieces, those two pieces where, venture capitalists, what they're looking for is co-founders that can hang out together, that like each other, that are not going to, fight, that are determined, that have had any amount, had some success. And so sort of all those factors came into play is we're venture backable people because we've got experience in our industry. We understand problems. We understand how to build and solve them, but we've also got as a team, we're just a really good fit together. Right. So it's a dangerous combination. If you add some venture capital to that, right. You can really go a lot of places if you've got those pieces of play. So
you really don't argue with your brother?
No.
No.
There's some things that he's an expert on and some things I'm an expert on, and we just leave it at that. Right. But if we do argue, I'm not saying it never happens, but, we've just learned over the years that, once the argument happens, it stops, we move forward and just move on. We're brothers, we're identical twins, right? So it's we've been arguing about things forever, but they're, we just get it that there's a long-term vision, and there's no reason to really get totally upset about the small things, right?
Sure. So Kurtis, you're in California, your brother is in Nevada, and then you have an office in Detroit. How do you run a company working remotely?
Well, I think that the good news is our company is relatively small, compared to large companies, right? So we've got about 30 people in a few different areas, right? So California, Nevada, Arizona, Texas, Detroit, Sochi, Russia, and Lahore, Pakistan. So we've got people everywhere. And we actually have one person in the Philippines as well now. So there's literally, at most countries, scattered everywhere, right?
Yeah.
But I think that the success we've had is because we started that way, right? So we weren't like a company all in an office and then tried to go remote. Kris and I have very, very much been a believer in remote culture for as long as I can remember, right? We've had this notion that there are talented people all over the world, and with the invention of the internet, there's no reason why they shouldn't be able to work together. And so we've always operated that way. It's always been, putting people in, we don't use like Slack, but that's a common one, or Teams, but we use a tool called Basecamp, and it just allows everybody to operate in the same room, if you will, but they're not physically near you. So we really have seen that as we have used that as a good leverage point for us. When we started this company, we didn't have like a ton of money laying around, right? I think Kris and I started this with like $100,000 in our pocket, and had we been hiring all people in the US right out of the gate, it would have just been not possible, right? So we've been able to sort of leverage, the world, if you will. Again, talented people all over the world, but people in different countries don't all the time need an American level $100K salary to be well off where they're at, right? You would be a perfect example. So we've definitely been a remote culture. Now as the company started to grow, now keep in mind, there is sort of this other side, especially within startups, where, if you put enough of the right people in the same box and they clash into each other, there's this collaboration that just can't be, it just can't exist in remote cultures, right? There's just like water cooler talk, and there's motivation and teamwork and all of that, you sort of need to be in an office. And so we've done a really great job with our Detroit office, and we're putting specific people in that office and specific teams that are sort of, we've got sales there and account management there. Kris and I fly out there once a month, so we're there for at least 7 days, 5 to 7 days out of the month. And those are where, those are sort of those positions within our company that you put the sales guys in a room, and they're going to make it happen, because there's this competitive nature, right? But for example, our entire engineering team is in Sochi, Russia. Now, the good news is, when we build teams sort of in different areas, we always put them in the same room, right? So in Sochi, Russia, that's where all of our engineers are. They're physically at the same, in the same office with pods of desks, to sort of get that environment going, where as they're building our tools and technology, they get that same collaboration, but they don't need to be with the sales guys per se. They can be involved in conversations, but not necessarily don't need to be in every day. And then in Pakistan, same thing. In Lahore, we've got an entire operations team over there, from tracking, scheduling, carrier sales, and they all, we have essentially a floor in an office over there, and they're all sitting next to each other. So they're getting that same teamwork and collaboration. And then you just have people run those teams, right? People that are, like myself. I run the kind of the operations team. So I'm always in meetings with the carrier guys, or our tracking team, our scheduling team, for example. And then Kris is always, having meetings with the Sochi team. So you sort of have these people that can lead here, and then just put teams in those locations. And then it seems to work really, really well. And then we plan on growing in a couple other locations as well. So, we feel that model has been pretty successful, and we'll see where it takes us.
Definitely. Sochi, Russia. Any chance you'd want to talk about how that came up? Like how to get it? Why did you open an office in Sochi?
Yeah, sure. So I didn't do it. I am not the brainchild of the Sochi office. My brother, Kris, is the brainchild of that. And My brother, he's very connected in just like I'm connected in the brokerage world and in the shipper world, if you will. He's very connected in the technology world, and so we actually found a gentleman who's like basically a large contributor to a specific code base. And I'm probably saying the wrong words, so engineers, if you're watching this, I'm sorry. But he's a contributor to a framework, if you will, called Django. And he runs one of the biggest like conferences for it in Sochi. And so him and Kris had met and connected on a lot of different things because we build our technology and the stuff that he's, kind of preaching or contributing to. And he was able to help us very quickly. He's got a network of guys, just like in brokerage, right? You hire a great sales guy, he's got 5 more with him type of thing. And in engineering, it's very much the same where, a good engineer is going to have like a bunch of friends, if you will, or connections. Sure. They're also good engineers. And generally they happen to live in the same place. And so that's where that sort of came about, just a run in, and then that turns into a relationship. And then that relationship starts to blossom, and we meet more people introduced by him, by other people, that sort of thing. So yeah, that's how the Sochi, Russia came about.
Very cool.
Hope to visit someday. I have not, but I definitely would like a summer visit out there.
Yeah, no, it looks amazing. I mean, I've been to Odessa, Ukraine, which is on the Black Sea. I'm not sure. Sochi's not on the Black Sea. I think it's in the Caspian Sea, right? Or is it on the Black Sea?
I'm not exactly sure. I'd have to look it up. I don't have a map in front of me. I just hear it's very, in the summertime, a very desirable destination. And a lot of the engineers we have over there, they're moving to Sochi. Like everybody's moving there.
So that's climate in Russia.
Exactly. Russia. Yeah, exactly.
Cool. And then Exo Freight. How did you come up with the name Exo Freight?
So earlier I kind of mentioned this, we are a digital brokerage, but there's a little bit different spin on it. The Exo Freight came about when we started this company. There was this sort of there was this vision of, are we a digital freight brokerage or are we not? And so you have in our industry, you have sort of this spectrum, if you will, where you have, let's use, for example, Convoy on one side, which a lot of people consider this like, the epitome of digital, right? But they're the cream of the crop in the digital world, but they get compared to, the analog brokerage, which is like the complete opposite side of the spectrum where, the people are the power versus the technology sort of thing. And so as I was at my prior company, it was like the constant, us versus them, right? We were going into the analog brokerages and they were trying to be like Convoy or compete with Convoy. And, that's their only competitor in their mind from a technology perspective. Obviously, Transfix, the other players out there, right? LoadSmart. And so, I said, okay, well, if we're going to come into the open deck space and build this digital brokerage, I think there's got to be this, it's not this side or that side or this or that, right? It's more of this blend between the two, because when you think about our niche, every load is different. No load is the same. That's why they invented the open deck trailer, because there are things that don't fit on a pallet that don't fit in a box. So how do you ship it? You have to have this open air environment, because who knows what it is, right? And so when you think about a digital brokerage, you go, okay, well, if I don't know what every piece is going to be every time, how do you automate it? There's too many variables, right? And my opinion is that's why a lot of technology hasn't gone towards this part of the industry, because it's just complicated. It's just too many variables, right? It's easier to just automate a box, a dry van, for example, or an LTL shipment or a reefer shipment. So kind of with that notion being said, it's like, okay, what are we going to name ourselves? And so we landed on Exo Freight, specifically because there's kind of a meaning between the 3 letters. We wanted to basically marry execution and optimization. So Exo really is the intersection of execution and optimization. Execution meaning we've still got great people at our company that know how to execute. And then optimization being we're building great technology to help those people execute further, and then also help our shippers, just have better technology and to support our carrier partners as well.
I like that. It's really neat. Kurtis, could you tell us what your 10-year plan is with Exo?
To be the largest logistics company in the space, right? Okay. No, seriously, our 10-year plan. 10 years is pretty far off. I think I'll go with the 5-year plan.
Okay.
So the 5-year plan for us is we would like to be north of, $500 million in 5 years. And I think there's a couple different ways we get there. The early part of it is obviously getting customers and moving loads, but really the much longer play for us is we want to have this technology layer that we're also sort of selling out to the market, right? Where it's Exo behind the scenes executing, but also there's this separate vision for us to have these shippers that are on our shipper TMS that we're releasing in January, and them executing. And so we'll sort of have this twofold where we'll be building more tools and expanding that platform, but we'll also be moving loads and people that are on our shipper TMS. It's not to say the reason why they're sort of separate is, one of the things that we're putting in there is you don't have to use Exo for every shipment, because open deck shippers have very dynamic networks where, they'll use a broker for 80% of their freight, but then there's maybe they'll have a private fleet, or maybe they'll have people that are sort of really dedicated to that location. And so there is this vision of them using a shipper TMS and us having just a complete technology layer of our company. And that technology side of the company is just focused on building those tools. And then obviously for the carrier as well. So, 5-year plan, we'll sort of have 3 pillars. There will be this brokerage in the center operating, and then there will be, technology layers for the carrier and our shipper customers. So there will be sort of 3-pronged approach, if you will.
Talked a few weeks ago, Kurtis, and you mentioned to me, because I'm not really I don't know a lot about venture capital and private equity. I've read into it ever since.
Yeah.
But you did mention that when you're venture backed, the probability of getting
right.
It's usually you go IPO. That's usually the next step after being venture backed, or being probably merged into or acquired in a different way. Could you tell us about maybe how do you envision Exo with now being venture backed 5-10 years down the line? Do you see it IPOing?
I do see it IPOing, and to kind of go back and dissect that a little bit. When you're thinking about building a company, there is a valuation tag, tag to that company, right? And as that valuation grows, just from a very generalization of this, as your valuation grows, you're sort of slowly limiting your opportunities to sell, right? So in our industry, I'll use a good example. Convoy, I'm not exactly sure what their last valuation was, but let's say it was north of $1 billion. I think it was 1.8 billion. That's not a direct reflection of maybe how much revenue they're doing or whatever it is. The valuation is the valuation based on, their raised money and what valuation they raise that money on. But what I mean is they sort of limit their ability, who's going to buy them, who's going to spend 1.8 billion or more on that company, right? There's probably somebody out there. I'm not saying that that's not an option for them, but I'm just saying as that valuation grows, it gets really hard. Those players begin to, it starts to get smaller and smaller and smaller pool of players that could buy you, right? So in our space, specifically, in logistics, it gets even more, murky, right? Where you have, let's use Exo, for example. When we get to a stage when we're $1 billion, 1.2, 1.5, and we're getting to that valuation, you sort of have to think in our space, who would buy us and why, right? So I think there's obviously some very large players that would say, hey, if these guys have built a business that has great technology in a niche that we don't service, that's highly motivating for them. But at what price? Potentially not a $1.8 billion price. So you just sort of you sort of have to understand when you're venture backed, there are exits that you can take at certain milestones. If you get to a certain point and somebody wants to acquire you, that happens, right? So, but for us, I think that, we're taking the path of we're in it for the long haul, and we want to IPO. That's where we see this, becoming a really, really big company. But there are companies out there that may say, hey, I want to get to a certain valuation and then I'm going to look for a buyer, right? But, they can't go too high because then they don't have any buyers left, right? There's nobody in the market that can necessarily afford them.
Sure.
So that's like, obviously in my eyes, just like a really generalization. I think there's a lot of other factors that go into it, but I mean, from a valuation perspective, what we weigh as founders is you really have to know what you want to be when you grow up. And that dictates, how much you raise and at what cap, for example.
You did mention you're raising money again in March, or you're announcing something?
We will be raising another round in March. So that'll be our Series A.
Okay.
I don't have any of the details on it yet, but
Cool.
you'll know in March.
Cool. Let me know. I'll announce it on my page.
Okay. All right.
And then just to wrap it up, Kurtis, if you could offer, I guess, a 20-year-old some advice, business wisdom, life wisdom, anything, what would you tell a 20-year-old right now that's graduating college and is about to venture off? What would you tell them?
I would tell them to not be afraid to take risks. And if you are a risk taker, go a little bit bigger than you think you can handle. Because at the end of the day, when you're young, you still got a lot of opportunity to fix a lot of wrongs or adjust. I'll say, like in my life, I sort of tell myself that I've had 3 careers. My first career was a very risk averse path. I got out of high school. I joined the U.S. Air Force. I got trained to become, an air traffic controller. I was extremely good at it. Loved the job. Not a lot of risk involved there. Obviously, joining the military, there is risk. So, I don't want that. But what I mean from a business perspective is it's a very linear path. There's not a huge growth trajectory for somebody that goes down that path, right? So then, like, by the time I was like 26, I started taking a little more risks, right? And then it was, start your company, and that turned out to do okay. And then, by the time I was 28, your age, I took another risk and moved to San Francisco and sort of figured out how to build technology companies and got really into it. And then now at, 30 years old, 31 years old, 30 when I started this, this is the biggest risk I've taken. So I would just say, like, I wish I would have done it 10 years earlier. I have people that I know in the venture community that have companies that are worth far more than me, that are half my age, not half my age, but 5-10 years younger, that are sitting in the same position I am, right? The guy that founded Embark Trucks, the guy's 23 years old. He's worth he's worth $500 million. He's 23. It's his first company, right? He left MIT. Embark, EMBARK. They just went public. Yeah, they just went public maybe a month ago. Mm-hmm.
That's with self-driving truck, right? Or
self-driving. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah. Oh,
yeah,
you know him?
Kid's 23 years old. I don't. His office used to be across the street from my apartment in San Francisco, where they make the trucks, cool. Or what? Not make them, but where they outfit them. So I don't know him, but that's the guy I wish I was at 23. Maybe not him specifically, but you could see the risk he took and the reward that he got.
Definitely.
He's set, right?
yeah, that's true. I like that. I mean, I'm a risk taker, and I like that advice, and it's helped me a lot in life too. So,
right. I mean, you're at that 20 years old, at 21, 22, whether you went to college or not, you just have a lot of time. And, if you start taking those risks early, it's easier to take a risk when you don't have a lot of things tying you down. But when you get to 30, 40, 50, as you grow, you start to acquire things and more responsibility, and it gets really, really challenging. So 21 years old, just do it then.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Well, Kurtis, I really appreciate you being on the podcast here. And I don't know, do you want people to connect with you on some social media?
Yeah. So
Kurtis, stay private.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm definitely like a LinkedIn guy. So I'm the only Kurtis with a K, Kurtis Tryber, only one on LinkedIn. So it's just, /Kurtis Tryber, and then, reach out to Exofreight, just info@exofreight.com or Kurtis at exofreight.com. Happy to take emails as well. Not a huge Instagram or like Facebook guy, but those would be the platforms, email and LinkedIn. Cool.
Well, Kurtis, I do appreciate your time, and I think we'll be talking sometime soon to hear some updates on Exofreight. I'm curious. I'm actually rooting for you guys, and I hope you could get me in on some pre-IPO stock options so I could invest.
There you go. All right. Well, awesome. Thank you so much for having me, Paul.
All right. Thanks, Kurtis. And that's a wrap.
All right.